Good morning. We break from our regular broadcast to deliver live coverage of the first main session of the APEC leaders meeting. This session with leaders of 21 APEC member economies will have President Lee Jae-myung as the host. Arirang News has been closely following APEC from the preparation stage. In a few moments, we will bring you live scenes as President Lee greets the leaders for this first session. Now, before we do, I would like to introduce two professors who will provide us with a deeper insight into this event. First, I have Professor Daniel Connolly to my right, Associate Professor of International Relations at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Welcome.
Yeah, great to be here.
We also have our Professor Mason Ritchie, Professor of International Politics at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Welcome.
Great, thanks for having me again.
It's always good to have you both. Now, Professor Ritchie, I would like to start with you. This is the first major multilateral summit hosted by President Lee Jae-myung here in South Korea. What are the primary diplomatic and economic objectives for South Korea as the host nation of this APEC?
Sure. So, obviously, like every leader, Lee Jae-myung wants to boost his domestic popularity. So, he has an agenda, as president with a party who he leads, and obviously he wants to make it as easy as possible for them to move their agenda domestically going forward. And that obviously implicates in this type of setting all of the pomp and circumstance that goes into hosting world leaders such as Donald Trump and Xi Jinping and Sanae Takaichi from Japan and all of the 21 leaders or their deputies who are going to be here for this. It involves obviously boxing through some type of joint statement to follow this up to show that, as a respected leader of a middle power, you can bring smaller powers together, middle powers together, and even great powers together for some type of common agenda. So that's obviously important. In terms of South Korea, abstracted just from the personal interest of Lee as a leader, South Korea obviously wants to set the agenda on some important items. I think probably first is at least in some way trying to shore up the open trade system. I'm not going to say free trade. I think that ship has now sailed with the type of global trade reordering that we've seen Trump administration 2.0 push through over the last 10 months. But at least some type of recommitment by many states in the region to something looking a little bit more like a traditional sort of open trade model. And then obviously there's some specific issues involving technology, innovation, demographic shifts, and things like that that are on the agenda, notably, of course, artificial intelligence in the chip sector. Demographics obviously are a big issue here, whether that be in countries like Japan and South Korea. Also China, that are becoming super aged populations where demographic shifts and tech and innovation are going to be an important part of stemming some of the negative consequences that come from that, or whether you're talking about countries in perhaps Southeast Asia that have opposite problems, which is to say that you might have a population that's too young and trying to absorb so many of them into the labor market. So that's going to be something that's on the agenda. So there are some items that are important for South Korea as a middle power. There are some items that are important for Lee Jae-myung as a leader, and then of course, in addition to the APEC multilateral dimension, in addition to that, you have all of the bilateral stuff that's happened here. And of course, again, for Lee, there are some parts of this that are important in terms of his ability to show that he can stand shoulder to shoulder with Donald Trump or Xi Jinping. But it's also the case, the multilateral side of this, is a framework for South Korea to push through some of its interests, whether it be trade with China and reaching a consensus and understanding on that, or whether it be shoring up relations between South Korea and Japan, which has a new prime minister, who's largely seen as being somewhat more nationalistic and therefore could potentially represent a threat both to bilateral relations and also the trilateral U.S., Japan, South Korea cooperation that's taken place over the last 5 years. And obviously the bilateral between Lee and Donald Trump, perhaps the most important thing to some degree, notably with the resolution of some of the tariff and investment issues, and some of the things that are beginning to come out in terms of alliance modernization, notably the possible deal on nuclear naval propulsion for South Korea.
Right. Professor Connolly, I'll get to you in a moment, but I'd like to tell our viewers that President Lee has arrived at the scenes. Now he's ready to greet the leaders of the member economies to this main session. It's hard to believe that APEC's main session is starting just today because there's been so much news out already in terms of what Professor Ritchie has already been saying, the bilaterals and all that. So before he starts greeting, I would like to turn to you, Professor Connolly. What the official theme of this APEC, I would like to touch on APEC first, is that building a sustainable tomorrow, connect, innovate, and prosper. Adding on to what Professor Ritchie has already said, how do you see South Korea kind of frame that agenda?
Yeah. Well, I think South Korea is a middle power in a world that's increasingly dangerous for middle powers. And APEC was an international organization created for globalization in a world where globalization is becoming a dirty word. So right. I think South Korea is doing a very good job of balancing its relations with the great powers, especially China and the United States. Also, it has to make itself attractive to the smaller economies in Asia. And I think what South Korea is doing is building on 20 years of APEC meetings and themes and putting its unique twist on it. Because at the end of the day, APEC is a consensual-based organization, which means that it really works on benchmarking and convincing each other to learn from best practices. And I think South Korea is in a really good position right now where borrowing the Chinese model is problematic, borrowing the US model can be problematic, but borrowing the South Korean model could be something very attractive for Southeast Asian countries that want to grow their economies, they want to integrate AI and other technologies without some of those headaches of the great power involvement.
And both you professors, leading up to this event, we've had multiple interviews, right? The D-30s and, D-7s. So we're very well now excited, I would say, because there's so much build up to this event. And you're right, like the middle powers and South Korea could set up an example for other members in the event. So before we go on, I would like to also touch on what's happened so far. Professor Ritchie, some big headlines. Let's go with the Trump-Xi summit. How do you view that, and what does it signify that it was during APEC in South Korea?
Yeah, so the Trump-Xi meeting, I guess the most important thing is, they did apparently reach a consensus to put a floor on the relationship, that was degrading inexorably, it seemed like. And so Trump and Xi have put a floor on the U.S.-China relationship in a number of areas. Not so much, it seems to me, at least in defense and security. Indeed, we saw Trump get on Air Force One and go wheels up back to the United States, and then make a very confusing statement that no one quite understood on Truth Social about the U.S. starting nuclear testing, and in part that was driven by his erroneous belief that China is soon going to reach nuclear parity with the United States. But at least in a number of sort of economic related areas, it seems like they've managed to put a floor in the relationship and sort of pause some of the rivalrous competition economically that we've seen, which was increasingly based on coercive levers. So the U.S. under Trump has now agreed to take off the table some of the tariffs that it was threatening, and already some of the ones that are in place. It looks like when all of the tariff reductions are taken into account, the effective tariff rate is going to be 47% on China, which is actually less than some of the U.S.'s supposed partners, such as India, just to give you an example. And it looks like there's some openness on the U.S. side coming from Trump with respect to loosening some of the export controls on high-level chips, notably the Blackwell chip from Nvidia. I don't think that decision is finally made, but it looks like that's something that might happen as well. So China's clearly going to be, I think, happy about that. In return, China has agreed to reopen the export of the rare earths and rare earth components and rare earth magnets and things like that had since October been subject to strict export controls. Some of the other rare earths and things aren't touched by these, so China's keeping some of its powder dry perhaps for future negotiations if it doesn't feel that the U.S. is in compliance with its part of the deal. And of course, the U.S. is doing the same thing, and Trump obviously holds in reserve the ability to snap back sanctions and other coercive measures if it wants to. So I think we should not assume that this is real peace, right? This is at best a truce. And I would even say it's more like a pause. The ongoing competition and rivalry is still there. And China, in addition to opening up some of these rare earths exports again, and doing that, agreeing to do that for at least a year before it comes back to the severe export controls, has agreed to make commodity purchases, notably of soybeans from the United States, which is a domestic political win for the agricultural base in the United States. And has agreed or recommitted, I would argue, to stem the flow of precursor chemicals for fentanyl, which was an important thing for the Trump administration. So in that sense, I think all of those things are positives, but obviously we'll need to see what the compliance is going to be on those and whether or not there are other areas of conflict that pop up in the coming months.
Sorry, while you were talking, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva has arrived at the event as the first one to do so. This is how it's going to be going from now on. He's going to be greeting all the leaders and the members that are attending the first session. Before I get to you, Professor Connolly, I would just like to remind everyone that the first session, the theme is toward a more connected, resilient world. That's to address the trade cooperation amid the ongoing sort of protectionism, and you touched on it, Professor Connolly. One highlight that I'd like to emphasize is that President Trump has already left, right? He might want to stay here for what everyone else is going to say about, global trade. What do you say about that?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a snub to South Korea or APEC. Trump has this habit of leaving multilateral meetings early. And I think he made it quite clear leading up to the event that he was going to leave early, unlike maybe some NATO events in the past where he left unexpectedly. So I would say this is just more Trump acting like Trump. It does maybe leave the battlefield to China, right? China is the only great nation, the great economy here. We saw in the days leading up to the Trump-China meeting, this talk about a G2. Well, now it's kind of a G1 if Trump's off. I think he's on his way to Central Asia for a series of meetings. But I think in the context of APEC, it's not that big of an absence. The US representatives are still here. They're probably still going to be working on the wording for the joint statement, which hopefully we will have. So I would say maybe a sign that free trade can exist without the United States being the active engineer of it.
Right. So at this moment, Vietnamese President Nguyen Quoc has arrived. He's taking the picture before he enters the hall for the main session. Vietnam is a comprehensive strategic partner with South Korea, exceptionally close and vital relationship in terms of economy. So it's the order of entrance is we're not quite sure yet, but we will do our best to introduce everyone entering the room. Continuing with what you were saying, sorry to cut you off before. As you said, Trump's absence is not that big of a deal. So what does Xi's presence then say about this APEC?
Right. Well, I think it definitely demonstrates this Chinese desire to be a trading partner, to, if not take the American leadership in free trade, at least to demonstrate that it's still willing to participate in these international organizations and multilateral trade, especially after their joint meeting yesterday. I think we are a little worried about the future of the multilateral trading organization. It's basically a one-year truce that the two great trading nations have established. Will it even last a year, right? The stock markets were a little weak this morning, which indicates that even a lot of the private sector is a little anxious about the stability between US and Chinese ties. So APEC does, though, represent a huge proportion of the world's GDP, even if we exclude the United States from it. So we can still have multilateral trade without the US going around the US, right? So we might see in the future more of a parallel trading system emerging where you have countries like Canada, Vietnam, Korea engaging in deeper and deeper economic integration, but maybe China, the United States, the EU being a little more protectionist and having these kind of silos in the global economy.
Right, and also I would like to mention that China will be the next APEC host. So we'll see, how China accepts the host role here in Gyeongju, because that's what happened last time when then President of Korea accepted the host role. Now, Professor Ritchie, another key aspect to APEC is AI cooperation, and the South Korea likes sort of taking the lead in terms of global AI cooperation. What do you see in that attempt to do so here in APEC?
Yeah, first, if I can come back to the discussion briefly about Trump not being here and China taking over next year. I think I agree with Professor Connolly that Trump not being part of the multilateral meeting is not necessarily a snub towards South Korea, but it is a snub towards multilateralism. And it's just sort of highlighting the fact that Trump ultimately doesn't think that these types of bodies are either performing or that they're worth the attention and the investment of the United States. And that does make it, I think, more challenging for these multilateral organizations to deliver in a significant way on their agendas. So I think I would point that out. And then, with China being here, I think it's going to be interesting to see how they take the baton from this year's agenda and turn it into their own agenda for next year.
Excuse me, Professor.
Yeah, sure.
I would like to say the United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has arrived at the scenes. Speaking of the United States, he's also been at the control center for the trade negotiations with other countries. If what we prepared so far is correct, we will be going the opposite of alphabetical order of guests, but we will not be sure until we're farther down the list. Now, Professor, let's continue with what you were saying. Sorry to cut you off. Yeah.
No problem, of course. Yeah. On AI, the thing really, of course, is that South Korea, I think, has differential interest in artificial intelligence, in the sense that, it is a tech leader, and AI is increasingly going to be a part of what it does, whether in the tech innovation space, whether that be the types of chips that it ends up producing, or the way that it incorporates AI into its own large language models that it produces here.
Right.
The way that it's going to incorporate this into its military, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, sorry.
Sorry. Thai Newton Sharnivirakul has arrived. Of course, a close friendly nation with South Korea, a key ally during the South Korean War. The partnership is strong in trade, tourism, and investment. So it's good that President Lee was able to meet with the president, with the Thai leader. Sorry.
No worries.
Yes. So AI.
So on the one hand, South Korea has a real interest in being an out in front, what we call bleeding edge leader, in this area, really pushing forward on an AI agenda. On the other hand, as a middle power, South Korea I think, needs to be a part of an effort to regulate and govern artificial intelligence. And in fact, last year there was an entire, a military use of AI conference here, Congress here to discuss how to use it responsibly. So that's an important part of the agenda as well.
Right.
I'll let you handle the.
Thank you. So Taiwanese Capital Chairman Lin Xin-yi has arrived. Now, it's something. Taiwan is also a friendly nation to South Korea, but former diplomatic relations were severed in 1992. But an unofficial relationship exists, of course, as Taiwan's relationship with many other nations around the world due to its diplomatic status. Now, that's according to our beloved reporter An Sung-jin's list that I've shared with you guys, that we've prepared for all these members, key facts.
I would point out Taiwan's a great example of what I'm talking about. Taiwan's a competitor of South Korea, but also a partner of South Korea. And so in the AI space, they both want to push forward on AI because they both want to, capture market in this area and sort of set the standards for how AI functions. At the same time, they both need it to be governed well because they would both potentially be subject to, for instance, Chinese or North Korean use of AI in the military that could endanger their own countries. So they have a sort of dilemma in terms of how it is that they want to regulate this. And so one of the things that South Korea is going to have to do in this type of multilateral setting is figure out how it's going to set up the agenda on regulating and governing AI.
Right. Now, Lawrence Wong, the Singaporean Prime Minister, has also arrived. Professor Connolly, would you like to share anything about Singapore?
Well, it's, I think, a really important trading partner in the region, and I think it exemplifies what we've been talking about already today, how the role of middle powers. If you think about financial centers in Europe, they've historically been the great powers, right? London, New York. But in East Asia, it's some of the smaller states that have this ability to act as hubs or financial centers. And South Korea especially, we were talking about AI, President Lee has announced that he wants to be the top three, right? After the United States and China, which is, I think, a really interesting dilemma that Korea has. Is it trying to be a great power in terms of a great trading nation, an economic powerhouse, or is it more willing to be one of these smaller middle powers? And I would say in AI, it's trying to be a leader. And that gives it a chance maybe again to create benchmarks and best practices for the rest of the region.
Now, Russian Minister Alexei Overshuk is here at the scene with shaking hands with President Lee Jae-myung right now. Of course, at a very complicated relationship at this moment. APEC is something that Russia can't miss, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, Russia needs economic development as much as everyone else. APEC focuses a lot on overcoming a lot of the technical trade barriers to trade, and Russia is being sanctioned because of its war in Ukraine. Participating in these forums is a much needed source of legitimacy for them, and Putin, of course, can't attend in person because he may be arrested.
Right.
So I think Russia's participation in these, and if we remember the last couple declarations as well, the war in Ukraine has sometimes featured in them. So you want to have a delegate here to try to
oversight,
keep the wording the way you want it to be.
Yep. In terms of wording, Professor Ritchie, joint statement is a big talk of town, right? Are we going to have it, or what does it mean to have one, would you say?
Yeah, so it's important, I think, for Lee to box through a joint statement, if for no other reason that failing to do so sort of dings the rewards that you get politically, both domestically and internationally, for hosting this. To some degree, you're punished a little bit for failing to push it through, although frankly, you don't get a lot of reward when you actually do produce a joint statement, because most people just consider these things to be, hot air and talking points and that sort of thing. So I think it is important, and I think one of the important questions is going to be what's in that joint statement, which we can come to in a moment after you introduce President Marcos.
We'll continue. President of the Philippines, Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. is here. Obviously, Philippines historically deep ties, fit countries to recognized ROK in 1947 and a key ally as well during the Korean War. The relationship is marked by strong trade, investment, and people-to-people exchanges. So, continuing with the joint statement, Professor, right?
Yeah, I certainly hope the relationship with the Philippines goes well because they're a source of a lot of my bananas here. I think the thing about the joint statement, is that what to some degree, I think what's less important is the number of things that are on there, as opposed to maybe the things that aren't on there. And so one of the things I'll be looking for is whether or not there's a recommitment to global trade under the aegis of the WTO, or the World Trade Organization, which is usually featured in the previous joint statements. And it will be interesting to see if that's the case this time, considering the hostility that the U.S. has towards the WTO. Here we have...
Yep. Teresa Mera Gomez, Minister of Foreign Trade and Tourism of Peru. Right, and Peru also is a comprehensive strategic partner with South Korea. There's an FTA between the two nations. Cooperation expands beyond trade to strategic sectors, including critical minerals and defense. Now, Peru is also, one of the most aspired places to go for a tour for a lot of Koreans, even though it's all the way across the globe. So, very close relationship with Peru. Okay, so is there anything to add to the joint statement?
No, I think the only other thing I would add, would be that we're likely to see some statements about connectivity, as a part of the joint statement, how important that is both for developed and also developing economies. And so not only within their kind of own worlds, but also connectivity between those areas as a part of a sort of development economics. As I said, some type of commitment to open trade, whether or not the WTO shows up there is an interesting question. Sustainability will obviously be a part of it, and then cooperation for innovation. I can expect all of those things in some form or another to show up on the joint statement. And then the question after that is, what types of things are going to be benchmarked? What types of, of elements of governance are going to be a part of that? What types of pathways for cooperation in those areas, can be worked out either within the APEC context or then sort of flowing from that.
Okay. So for now, John Rosso, Deputy Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, is here. South Korea is key importer of Papua New Guinea's natural gas and minerals. So we do have a few that's already entered, and we're almost halfway through the leaders that are expected at the first session. Now, I'd like to remind everyone that the first session will focus on openness in terms of trade, and President Lee will give an address declaring that APEC has officially started with this main session and a speech to address, and it'll follow lunch, and there'll be a few more sessions before APEC closes tomorrow. Now, Professor Connolly, actually, let's introduce New Zealand's Prime Minister Christopher Luxon first before I get to you. New Zealand is a friendly nation with South Korea, of course. They participated in Korean War to support South Korea. There's a free trade agreement between the two nations. Now, New Zealand is a country population of 5.25 million people, yet, they have a strong say among, international community, right? And I think that goes back to your point about middle nations, maybe, right? Key strategic partners, right?
Right, and they're definitely hitting above their weight when you compare the size, yeah.
Right, and these international events will put up a stage for these, middle countries to sort of voice their needs and let them communicate with bigger countries, with bigger economies and more population. Now, next we have the Mexican Secretary of Economy, Marcelo Luis Ebrard. South Korea and Mexico also share a close relationship, strategic partner, and there's a lot of economic opportunity between South Korea and Mexico, especially considering the North American market with all the tariffs going on. A lot of things, a lot of South Korean electronics, cars, are produced in Mexico, used to be sort of exported to the United States market. So the close relationship between a lot of these American countries, right, in the Central America and North America, and also like Peru, South America.
I think it reflects this redirection of trade routes and supply chains that, think about the traditional North American free trade arrangements. Trump kind of overthrew that. Now you see middle powers creating their own trade networks to try to get around these tariff barriers.
And they're sort of in the same shoes, right, with South Korea, especially Mexico, a big exporter to the United States. So it'll be interesting what the leaders of these two nations can, talk about.
일본 총리입니다.
The Japanese Prime Minister Sane Takaichi has arrived. Now, the two already met last night. We'll get back to that point with the first summit between the two. She's just recently been elected as the Prime Minister of Japan, the first woman to serve in that role. Now, they got a lot of things to sort of address as the two, are recently having taken the roles, leadership of the two nations. I think the entrance intervals are speeding up, to be honest with you, right?
Yes.
I guess everyone has arrived, sort of waiting for their grand entrance.
And I should point out that between Japan and Korea, we see a little less of this cooperation that we see maybe between Mexico and South Korea, that there's an opportunity there for more cooperation in this era of great power.
Right, there's room for improvement for sure, right?
No.
Especially during the tensions in East Asia.
Yeah.
And so we'll get back to what happened last night between the two leaders. The Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim has also arrived. Now, Malaysia is a big country in Southeast Asia, of course, strategic partner with South Korea. It's, growing from trade to high-tech sectors and AI. So a lot to work with for South Korea and Malaysia.
Malaysia is really important, of course, obviously, as one of the hubs for ASEAN. South Korea is trying to diversify its supply chains, it's trying to diversify its diplomatic and economic partners, it's trying to diversify sources for critical inputs, including notably raw materials, commodities, critical minerals, and things like that. And Southeast Asia is an important part of that, and ASEAN in particular is sort of the central hub for all of that. And of course, Ibrahim himself, just chaired the ASEAN-focused meetings just before APEC. So he's actually had quite a whirlwind week himself, and apparently quite successful. He was really hugely praised by Trump for the way that he handled the multilateral meetings down in Kuala Lumpur. So he's following on here, and at least in some ways probably trying to build some momentum and steam forward on multilateralism, even without the United States being a significant supporter of that type of mechanism.
Right, and another key player in Southeast Asia, Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto has arrived. Indonesia, I like to note, that has a population of 285.7 million people. And of course, a close relationship with South Korea, special strategic partnership. The KF-21 fighter jet project collaboration was a big deal between the two nations in recent years.
And I think if you take a look at that population figure, I think this is also a reminder that there's a lot of markets other than the United States. And a lot of these Indonesians are going to be middle income in the next 10, 20 years. And there's a lot of opportunities for Korean businesses in this region.
I'd also note, of course, that KF-21 project didn't always go very smoothly. There were some real problems with some potential espionage involved in the story. There was a problem of non-payment by Indonesia. I think it's been worked out, if my understanding is correct, but it was a bit of a hot topic for a while, which just shows that states don't always get along, but they can put their differences behind them.
Right, right. Now, Hong Kong's Chief Executive John Lee is here. Relations, of course, primarily economic. Major financial hub for trade between South Korea and China. And investment promotion and protection agreement is in force between the two parties. There isn't many multilateral scenes that Hong Kong participates, right? Yeah.
Right,
So
right.
this is a key event, especially for Hong Kong.
I think maybe this is a sign too of APEC's uniqueness, right? Where you have Taiwan, Hong Kong, China, United States, Russia. There's not that many economic
You got to
forums
be
with
careful
this.
because you can't just say nations for APEC. It's got to be economies or members.
Exactly.
So that's a difference in terms of this and G20 or G7, some other annual multilateral events that we cover.
And of course, the huge private sector involvement as well, the CEO summit and everything.
Right, the CEO summit, the APEC, which is the business council for APEC members.
칠레
Now,
대통령입니다.
Chilean President Gabriel Boric Font has arrived. Chile and South Korea diplomatic relations since 1962. It's centered on 2004 Korea-Chile Free Trade Agreement. Chile is a key partner for critical minerals. Now, of course, critical minerals are crucial for South Korean economy, right? Some of the for whether it's batteries or semiconductors. So it's important that these bilateral relations also stay strong, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also shows that within the context of APEC, we have developed economies that focus a lot on free trade, but we also have a lot of developing economies or economies that are primary goods producers. So there's a lot of different perspectives in the context of APEC, which means how to reconcile all these interests is something that every host has to keep in mind.
Right. Now we're waiting. Now we've only got a handful left to enter. So we're still waiting for some of the big players here. Chinese President Xi Jinping isn't here yet. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney also hasn't arrived yet. So we're expecting some key figures to also enter. And for the time being, however, I would like to remind everyone, if you're just tuning in, that the first session is going to be focusing on sort of the trade scene amid the global protectionism, especially with the tariffs imposed on countries by the United States. Now,
카나다 총리입니다.
speaking of tariffs, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has just entered. South Korea and Canada share a great relationship, comprehensive strategic partnership. Of course, Canadian forces helped South Korea during the Korean War. There is a free trade agreement between the two nations. Now, there's a lot of Koreans, of course, in Canada, or Korean Canadians, excuse me, and the two probably have a lot to talk about, especially with the tariffs with the U.S., right?
Right. And Canada's looking for submarines these days, and South Korea is one of the contenders in this process.
Right. So we just saw Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, enter after shaking hands with President Lee Jae-myung. Now he's got only a couple left to greet before he heads in to declare official beginning of the APEC 2025 in Gyeongju. For those just tuning in, Arirang News has actually been covering closely about the APEC preparations and what's going on so far. And this is the live broadcast of the first session, where President Lee Jae-myung is continuing to meet and greet with all the leaders
tell you,
enter.
you mentioned earlier about Trump being gone and what that meant for APEC. I'll say one person who probably is happy that he's gone is Mark Carney.
Yeah, right.
The relationship between Trump and Carney has not been particularly great, really throughout most of Trump's tenure. And then, of course, most recently, an advertisement coming out of Ontario, criticizing the U.S. tariff policy, again inflamed the relationship. And my understanding is that the dinner a couple of evenings ago had Trump and Carney sitting across from each other at one of the tables, and I think that there was a sort of barely contained disdain, or maybe not even contained disdain by Trump for Carney. So my guess is that Carney may be happy that he's gone. And I guess I'd say to some degree there might be some sense that maybe South Korea is perhaps partially relieved, and maybe other APEC countries are partially relieved that Trump isn't there, simply because his obstinance towards agreements and his mercurial nature, might make discussions and potentially, signing, a joint statement more complicated. So, perhaps I'm going too far saying they're happy he's gone, but they're probably at least in some way relieved. And I guess I'd also say, with respect to Canada, again, middle powers trying to find their way around the great power competition and around, especially the United States as a sort of new kind of revisionist trade power. A perfect example of that is what we've seen South Korea and Canada set up over the last few years, notably with a critical minerals partnership, which is extremely important in the battery sector, for instance.
Right. Now, Anthony Albanese, Australian Prime Minister, has just entered. Of course, Australia and South Korea also great relationship, comprehensive strategic partners. Shared interest in the region. Needless to say, Australia has participated also in the Korean War to support South Korea. And a fun fact, South Korea is Australia's fourth largest two-way trading partner. So a lot already going on between the two.
And it's really a complementary relationship,
right.
In some ways even more so than Canada. There's a lot of similarities, with respect to the complementary of their economies, but Australia is, if anything, even a bit more present in the sense that it's a purchaser of South Korean arms, for instance, in addition to obviously other industrial goods, and of course, much like Canada, it serves as a source of raw materials and critical inputs into South Korea's industrial economy. So that's a very important trading relationship and a very important strategic partner for South Korea.
Right. Now, we have two leaders to greet, according to what I have. We have Brunei and China still yet to arrive.
브루나이 국왕입니다.
Speaking of, Hassano Bolkiah, Sultan of Brunei, has arrived. Of course, Brunei, only a population of 466,000 people, but GDP of 15.68 billion US dollars. A very rich country for its size. So
it's good to have gas.
Yes.
Small country with large natural gas reserves is
right.
the way to go. I'm sure that they're happy about that, because I'm not sure what else they have to offer. But that's certainly important for South Korea, which purchases some of their LNG.
Right. This, as I said, despite its size, a key player in Southeast Asia, Brunei. Sultan Hassano Bolkiah has arrived. Now we are waiting, possibly the biggest name now that Trump has left Gyeongju. Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to be the next one to come, as he will be the last one to enter. And that means
a little bit of a power move coming in late.
It could be. And maybe it is, being that a lot of other countries don't have their top leaders at the event, it could be a way to respect the next host of APEC also.
I'll be interested to see how this handshake goes. China can't be happy with this nuclear naval propulsion outcome of the Lee-Trump meeting. They've already telegraphed that they're unhappy with some of the shipbuilding cooperation, with putting sanctions on Hanwha affiliates in the United States. And South Korea acquiring nuclear-powered submarines with the United States' blessing clearly is going to make China, I think, unhappy. So will be interesting to see how Xi Jinping looks as he's shaking Lee Jae-myung's hand. Of course, they've got a meeting coming up later.
Excuse me, sorry. Yes, UAE is actually participating as well. Khalid bin Mohammed Al Nahyan, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, is here on behalf of the UAE leader.
Well, the UAE is obviously critical,
right?
Historically important recently historically important because of the nuclear power plant deal, the Al Baraka
with South
power
Korea.
plant deal. So there's a history there, and of course, obviously, that's one of South Korea's important inroads into the Middle East. To go back to China and Xi Jinping, Professor Connolly talked about a power move. I'll also be interested to see not only the expression on Xi Jinping's face as he shakes Lee's hand, but also their positioning for the handshake. There's a sort of handshake power structure where the person who's standing on the right as you face the two people shaking hands is in a more open position, which is generally seen as the power position, whereas the person on the left, as you face two people shaking hands, has to cross their body with their arm in order to shake the other person's hand, which is generally seen as being a defensive and therefore a weaker position. So it will be interesting to see how they're set up for that. The way things have been happening for every one of the leaders until now has been Lee Jae-myung on the right, as you face the image of the two people shaking hands, and the leader who he's welcoming on the left, which makes sense as being the quote-unquote weaker of the two positions, or the more defensive of the two positions. It will be interesting to see if that's how things play out now.
Right, and of course they have a summit lined up after APEC. China's President Xi is also visiting South Korea on a vacation, and it's interesting. Trump's summit with the President Trump was before APEC, but now that Trump has left APEC, after APEC ends, there will be a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping for President Lee Jae-myung. Now we're taking a little break. We haven't seen the Chinese president enter the event, and to ask you some more questions about the session going on, Professor. Let's touch upon sort of the main idea for APEC before we get to the detailed ones. The official theme, of course, of APEC 2025 is building a sustainable tomorrow, connect, innovate, and prosper. Once again, how can South Korea really push this agenda during these years?
Right. Well, I think it takes a little bit of creative work to shift basically these themes to what South Korea does best. And one of the things that really stood out is this focus on creative industries and culture. So by promoting culture, South Korea is able to do what it does best, K-pop, soft power, make this part of the APEC this year. Also, the demographic shifts are very important. And I think these together are really helping South Korea brand itself somewhat differently, even though these themes, prosper, connectivity, these have been around for 20 years in various forms, but it's updated for this new kind of geopolitically insecure era.
Right, and going on with that, you've gave us a great answer on AI while we're looking at, but I would like to touch on it again because that's something South Korea has been pushing for throughout the recent years. And here at APEC, it's really time for South Korea to really emphasize its role as someone leading AI cooperation around the world, right?
Sure, and I've already said quite a bit about that. And it will, of course, be connected to almost everything that's on the agenda in other respects. So, when you're talking about innovation, well, obviously AI is sort of ground zero of innovation. When you're talking about prosperity Obviously, AI is supposed to make our lives better. It's supposed to make us more efficient. It's supposed to raise living standards. It's supposed to solve problems that can't be solved in other ways, whether that be, through, synthetic biology and the use of pharmaceuticals, whether that be through, aiding people-to-people exchanges, through translation and interpretation, whether that be through, automating processes and pattern recognition, and all of the other things that we think that we can do, with AI. Sustainability, it's supposed to, allow, improvements in, energy efficiency and other things like that that contribute to sustainability. I would just point out two other sort of downside risks. And what I would like to see come out of this meeting is some recognition of those. And the first of those downside risks is that there's really, I think, a growing consensus that AI is generating a giant market bubble. And that a lot of the promises that are being made on AI aren't actually going to be fulfilled, and that we're going to end up with something like the big bubble that we saw with the financial crisis and the real estate housing crisis and the dot-com bubble of the early 2000s. And the second area is the amount of energy that you're going to need to run these data processing centers for training the AI models. And so how we approach that so that it doesn't end up hurting the sustainability goals is, I think, a critical question to be asked as well. So I hope that the leaders deal with those agenda items as well, and don't simply look at AI as a pie in the sky savior of all of our problems going forward.
Right. Now, just to remind our viewers, we're waiting for Chinese President Xi Jinping to arrive at the scenes of this first session of the main APEC leaders meeting. So he's the only one left right now. And as I said, there will be a summit between President Lee Jae-myung and Xi Jinping after APEC. This is Xi Jinping's first visit to South Korea in more than a decade. In a few moments when he arrives, it will be the first time the two leaders shake hands at a critical time, when the United States has given a green light to South Korea's nuclear power submarines, like Professor Ritchie has already mentioned. Now we see Chinese President Xi Jinping. And as you said, the handshake is very important between the two leaders, and seems to be a composed, he's looking at the media right now. It's one of the big moments that APEC was supposed to serve the public when President Lee meets with Chinese President Xi Jinping during his first visit to South Korea in more than a decade, like I said. Now, President Lee will be heading into the main session for this year's APEC in Gyeongju. He's going to declare the beginning of APEC 2025 with a keynote speech, which we'll deliver once that starts. But for now, we're going to come back to the studio and sort of discuss what this means more. And now that everyone is in and they're preparing for a keynote speech, and we're assuming the speech is going to be on the global trade issue amid ongoing global protectionism. Now, the theme of the first session will be toward a more connected, resilient world for trade cooperation. Professor Connolly, we just saw President Xi enter. Now, what would you say from your experience in watching these diplomatic events? How was Xi's expression compared to maybe when he met with Trump?
Right. Well, I would say definitely warmer than when he met with Trump. The body language meeting with Trump, there's an actual leaning away from Trump, which is quite visible. But he doesn't look super pleased at the same time. So I think maybe a little bit of this gravitas, this sort of not showing as much emotion, definitely, as a lot of the other leaders. But I think he is here to cooperate. He is here to set the tone. So also, as I absolutely agree with Professor Ritchie, he's not overjoyed about this whole idea of South Korean nuclear submarines. I think the idea of these nuclear submarines being built in the United States is another big issue, because the United States uses highly enriched uranium for their submarines, whereas maybe indigenous South Korean submarines, Lee asked for lower enriched reactors. So that alone, I think, is a very big issue that maybe behind closed doors they may talk about in more detail after the APEC summit. But in terms of having the summit before with the United States, as you mentioned earlier, I think that's really important for the joint statement. Because we have the US summits with China and with South Korea before, we maybe can take a deep breath and think that there's maybe fewer roadblocks for a joint statement. Because the US and China have a very tenuous truce right now, it's less likely they're going to play hardball when negotiating the final wording for the joint statement. So if that meeting was scheduled after APEC, then maybe we could have saw escalation and posturing before. So I think maybe having the US, Korea, US, China before is the safer route for the Lee administration, and schedules probably made it that way.
Yeah, it worked out for Korea maybe.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I'll just jump in on Xi, and I'll say he actually deftly dealt with the handshake problem by actually facing Lee to shake his hand and then separating their hands for the photo op. So he could stand parallel to Lee rather than having to face him and cross his body with his arms. So that's a way of getting around the difficulty that I mentioned in terms of having to cross your body with your arm in that more subservient handshaking position. And that may seem like a small thing, and it is a small thing in some respects, but I think it shows, among other things, that Xi Jinping knows what he's doing. This isn't his first handshake, right? He's done it with Trump, he's done it with Putin, he's done it with other leaders as well. Most famously, probably the handshake with Shinzo Abe, where Xi Jinping looked truly unhappy to be there. And if I remember correctly, he was also in the cross-body position, which might have contributed in some respects to why it is that he felt like he wasn't very happy with that photo op. So he dealt with that deftly. And I'll say his expression was less antagonistic than I would have expected. It was somewhat more neutral. He didn't look like he was upset to be there, I guess I would say. So maybe Lee can book that as a win for the moment, although I'm pretty sure that their summit meeting tomorrow is going to have a number of agenda items that are going to be pretty touchy.
Right, and they just entered the room where the main session is going to be held. And we saw President Lee Jae-myung and Xi Jinping walk in together. And as you said, the expression wasn't too bad. Right. It's always interesting to zero in on those small things because they kind of send a message to everyone in terms of how they face the media, the handshakes. And now, as you can see, the APEC leaders meeting session 1 is about to start. What you see on the screen is, as you saw, the Lee Jae-myung and the IMF leader is talking before the session starts. President Lee Jae-myung is due to give an opening remark, a keynote speech before the leaders go into a discussion for this first main session. Of course, what we see on the screen is President Xi Jinping, speaking with other leaders also gathering before the session starts. After this, they're due to have lunch, and there are more sessions throughout today and tomorrow for the APEC in Gyeongju. Now, when President Lee Jae-myung starts to take the podium and give an address, we will give that coverage live with a simultaneous interpretation for our viewers. But for now, we're still waiting for the declaration of the APEC 2025 starting for this year.
It's interesting to watch who's speaking with whom at the moment. So you've got Lee Jae-myung talking with Georgina Kristeva of the IMF. Prime Minister Takichi was sitting alone.
Right. Scott
Bessent was standing alone. Xi Jinping was talking with, I believe, the leader of Vietnam, if I remember correctly. So it's interesting to see maybe who's getting attention from which leader. I wish I were there to have a better overview of that. Right. All we're getting is the camera view on that, but maybe told you something about where the warmth in relations is.
Right. And I think President Lee Jae-myung is about to start giving his speech.
I'd also note some of those leaders must be tired by now. Christina Georgiev has been in that room for 45 minutes, waiting on everyone else to show up,
waiting for everyone else
which is, of course, again, a power move, right? Xi Jinping obviously comes in last, which is totally expected.
Yeah.
doesn't
he's
wait
got
for
a lot
anyone.
catching up to do.
Now there's Xi Jinping with Scott Busan.
Right, and the room is being settled, I believe. The time zone difference. Some of them may be jet lag as well. So waiting is also going to be, like you said, very tough.
I could explain some face expressions.
Right. Maybe they didn't mean it, right?
네.
Now President Yi will take the microphone. Yeah, we're still waiting, but I think President Yi Jae-myung will soon start to give his opening speech of first main session at this year's APEC in Gyeongju.
네.
I think it's important.
네. 약간 시간이
Well, we have been
지연되고 있긴
delayed
합니다만
a bit,
마저 인사 나누시고요.
so but still, please take time to greet yourselves.
네. 우리 정상 여러분,
Leaders around the
너무 반갑습니다.
world, it is so nice to
지금부터
see you. We would like to
제32차
begin the
APEC 경제 지도자 회의를
32nd APEC
시작하겠습니다.
Economic Leaders Meeting.
APEC 회원 경제 지도자 여러분,
The leaders of
초청에
APEC
응해주신
countries and
UAE의 칼리드
UAE
천년
Mr.
고도
Khalid,
경주에 오신 것을 우리 대한민국
who have
국민들과 함께
accepted our invitation.
진심으로
Together
환영합니다.
with the people of the Republic of Korea, we
2025년은
welcome you to
대한민국이 국민의
the
놀라운 저력으로
city of
민주주의를
Gyeongju.
회복하고
Korea, the Republic of Korea, had recovered
역사적인
democracy
해입니다.
with the surprising
이 막중한
strength with the
시기
people, and we have
APEC
returned
경제
to
지도자
the
회의의 의장을
world
맡게 되어
stage. And at this
진심으로
very important
영광스럽게
time, it is
생각합니다.
a great honor for us to be
APEC의
the
눈부신 성취를
chair
이루며
nation
다자주의적
of this
협력의
APEC.
모범을 바로
And
세웠던
APEC
그 순간마다
every time it
대한민국은
had
그
set
여정을
straight
주도하며
the
함께
order,
해왔습니다.
and the Republic of Korea had been at the
원년
side
회원으로서
all the
APEC의
time.
발전을
As
이끌었고
the original member of
1991년
APEC, we
서울
had
선언을
been
통해
in the lead, and in
APEC의 제도적 기반을
1995, we
마련했습니다.
also had chipped in by
2005년
establishing
부산에서는
the institutional
공역
order of
자유화를
APEC,
위한
and in
구체적
2005,
이행 방안,
we have also
부산 로드맵이 채택됐습니다.
the Busan roadmap was
우리가 하나로
adopted.
연결될수록
And as we
서로에게
become
서로를
one and be
개방할수록
connected and be
APEC
open
회원들은
to one another,
번영의
the
길을
APEC
향해
membership
한 걸음씩 나아갈 수
countries
있었습니다.
could go further to
APEC
a
출범 후
more
회원들의
prosperous
국내
world.
총 생산은
The GDP
5배,
of all the
교역량은
member
무려
countries
10배 늘었으며
fivefold, and
단단한
also the trade
공동
had
번영의 토대 위에서
increased tenfold. And based on that
경제
solid
강국으로
foundation, the
우뚝
Republic of Korea
자라났습니다.
could become one of the
협력과 연대,
economic
상호 신뢰의
powerhouses.
효능을 증명한
Cooperation,
APEC 정신이
solidarity,
이곳
and
경주에서도
the cooperation,
유감없이
the spirit
발휘되기를
of
기대합니다.
that, I hope that we can exert
하지만
that in Gyeongju this year
희망찬
as well.
전망만
However,
우리가 처한 현실이
the
녹록지는 않습니다.
situation that we're facing is
우리 모두는 국제 질서가
quite rough,
격변하는 중대한
and
변곡점 위에
we
서
are at
있습니다.
a very important inflection
자유무역
point.
질서가 거센 변화를
The free
맞이하며
trade order is
글로벌 경제의
facing
불확실성이
tumultuous
심화되고
future, and
및
the
투자
competition
활성화에
is getting
동력이
fiercer,
떨어지고
and
있습니다.
the driving force
인공지능으로
for this
대표되는
trade
기술혁명은
is
우리에게
decreasing,
전례 없는
and
위기이자
AI
동시에
is an
전례 없는
unprecedented
가능성을
risk,
선사합니다.
and at the same time, it is an
쉽지 않은
unprecedented
도전이지만
opportunity.
APEC이 걸어온
Of course,
여정에
this is not an easy
지금의
feat,
위기를
but
헤쳐갈
with
답이
the
있다고
APEC history, I believe that we can find
협력과
answer.
연대만이
And
우리를 더
cooperation
나은
and
미래로
solidarity, they
이끄는
would be the
확실한
only
해답입니다.
things, and they will be the only resolutions that
각자의
will
국익이
bring us
걸린 일이기
forward.
때문에
Because we
언제나
have
우리가
national interest in
같은
front of
입장일 수
all of
없다는
us,
것은
and I
분명합니다.
understand very well
그러나
that
힘을
we
합쳐
cannot always be
공동
in
번영을
a
이뤄내야
consensus.
한다라는
However,
궁극의
we
목표
have
앞에
to muster our strengths to achieve prosperity. And with that, I believe that we can come together. The sustainable future and connection and sustainability, this theme of this year's APEC was the blueprint that we had, and this is upholding that spirit that we had adopted at Putrajaya in our last session. And we would like to listen to your precious opinions on this Putrajaya spirit. Amongst and amidst this crisis that we are in, I would like to look forward to a candid discussion with all of us, leaders around the world. Here, where we're gathered today, is APEC Convention Center that we will be holding our conference for the 2 days. And here is where the APEC meeting, where the leaders of this country had come together, our ancestors, and they were in pursuit of harmony and harmonious coordination of their opinions, and that is the spirit of Shila's APEC. And in this 1,000-year-old capital, I hope that you and we, all of us, could seek wisdom from it. That is all from me. Thank you. So when our press retrieves, we are going to resume with our meeting. In the meantime, the chief of IMF, I hope that you can prepare for our next session, the following session. Thank you.
Right, that was the opening speech of Session 1 by President Lee Jae-myung for this year's APEC 2025. Now, we've heard cooperation among the members throughout his speech. And to continue, I'll get to the professors for what you thought about the speech. Let's start with you, Professor Connolly. What did you think about the speech?
Well, I thought he struck the right kind of tone, right? We are at a great turning point, and this turning point is not only in terms of politics and politics about trade, but it's also a technological turning point. And as Professor Ritchie already said, the risks of AI are definitely there as well as the opportunities. And it was great to see President Lee really touched on both of these issues as well. And hopefully South Korea can put itself forward as someone who's not only able to pursue the opportunities of this technology, but also help mitigate a lot of the risks and create best practices. And I think looking more broadly at the role of APEC and South Korea's role, it's something I call like mundane globalization, that even though maybe a lot of these big free trade agreements are not going to be possible in the near future, APEC really focuses a lot on a lot of technocratic issues. So like cross-border payments or data compatibility or inefficient digitalization. I think there's still a lot of room that countries like South Korea can really help make the regional economy much more efficient in these low politics types areas. And I think that might be part of this solution to the great turning point.
Right, and Professor Ritchie.
I guess I'd say three things. The first of which is, Lee hit on all the points that one would have expected. Cooperation. I was perhaps a bit surprised to hear the word solidarity. That's not a word you usually hear in international context. I think that once the press leaves and the doors are closed, we'll see a lack of solidarity as states try to push forward their national interests and leaders try to push forward their individual interests. But at least it's a nice thing to hear. The deterioration of the free trade environment, AI risks and opportunity. Obviously, that's an important part of what's been broadcast for this agenda. Sustainability, prosperity. What was there? There was another word. It was connectivity. So those are all things that I think that we expected him to touch on. I think out of all of those, the one that I think is perhaps the most pregnant by what was not said was, of course, why it is that the free trade environment is deteriorating. And the short answer to that is, one person who's not in the room, Donald Trump, and one person who is in the room, Xi Jinping, both of whom are important partners for South Korea, and of course for the rest of the countries around the table as well. And the fact of the matter is the United States and China are in the process, in different ways and for different reasons in some respect, blowing up the international trade order and trying to create a new order. Of course, he can't say that, but that's the truth of the matter. And it's going to be very complicated and difficult and arguably impossible to rebuild that trade order without China and the U.S. pulling their weight as they are supposed to do, and in many cases have done over the last couple of decades, but of course, slowly, or in the case of the United States, quickly moved away from support for that open trade order. The second thing I'd point out is that the speech was shorter than I expected. Perhaps I'm used to the speeches that he gives domestically here in Korea, or perhaps the 15-minute address that he gave at or 20-minute address that he gave at the UN General Assembly. So it was a bit shorter than I expected. I assume that was intentional, although for all we know, perhaps his speechwriters have been, and people preparing him have been so busy trying to get ready for the bilats that they didn't have much time to work on this opening address. And then the third thing I'll say is, this opening statement and the meeting itself and the pomp and circumstance that went into welcoming all of those leaders provides a sort of veneer of normality in international affairs. But I think it's important to remember that things are highly abnormal right now. It's not normal that we treat the bilateral trade agreements that the United States has extorted from its partners as normal, considering that the tariff rates are now higher than they were before Trump took office. That's not normal. It's not normal that the United States is bullying its neighbors and its partners and its allies. It's not normal that China is bullying the Philippines in the East China Sea, or even South Korea here in the East China Sea. In the Provisional Maritime Zone. That's not normal. It's not normal that Trump has to be gifted a gold crown replica from the Shilla dynasty in order to flatter him sufficiently that he's willing to make deals with his allies. That's not normal. So we can put a patina of normality on what's happening here with this type of meeting, and we can pretend that the world is a normal place, but it's not right now. And it's not primarily because of China and the United States. One of them is in the room, and we'll see what they do with this meeting. One of them is not in the room, at least at the leader level, and so we'll see what that portends for the future as well.
Right, and as you said, Professor, what's not said, like Professor Ritchie said, is also important. But it was a fairly short speech. Sort of expected it, like you said. He's been giving speeches for the past few days, on a diplomatic stage. So it was a fairly short, but as we expected, he focused on cooperation and collaboration among the global society. So we will have more on the session 1 of the main events later in our newscast. We'll bring you what happens there. Now, that ends the special broadcast of the first main session for APEC Leaders Meeting. Thank you, Professor Connolly, for being here with us. It was a long run of events. Professor Ritchie, thank you as always.
Happy to be here.
In a moment, we'll be back with our new day, where we go straight to our team in Gyeongju for more coverage of APEC. Stay with us. Now let's go to our morning edition of Arirang News. As I said, we will go straight to APEC main sessions coverage at Gyeongju. We saw President Lee Jae-myung welcomed and gave his remarks for opening ceremony of the session 1 throughout today, and tomorrow a series of APEC sessions will be held. We have a team and a studio down in Gyeongju for our events coverage. Our New Day anchor Bae Eun-ji is standing by right now. Eun-ji, please do start us off.
Sure, Doyan. So I'm here at Arirang TV's special studio setup here in Gyeongju. Right behind me is the Gyeongju Hwabaek International Convention Center, where the APEC leaders meeting is currently underway. So for more on that, let's go over to our presidential office correspondent Song Yoo-jin, who is standing by on the line for us. Yoo-jin, what did you make of President Lee's opening remarks?
Yeah, I was supposed to report to you live from the International Media Center, but due to heavy traffic control, I'm currently on the road heading there. Now, making his debut as the host of this huge multilateral event, the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, President Lee Jae-myung's address stressed the importance of regional economic cooperation and solidarity, especially amid growing external challenges such as rising protectionism, as we just heard. So the first of the two sessions of the APEC Leaders Meeting is, of course, underway under the theme towards a more connected, resilient region and beyond. Discussions will focus on promoting trade and investment, enhancing regional economic connectivity, and strengthening public-private cooperation to unlock growth potential. So participants include leaders from the 21 APEC member economies, as we just saw, such as Chinese President Xi Jinping and Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, along with invited guest Crown Prince Khalid of the UAE and IMF Managing Director. So first take a listen to what National Security Advisor Lee Seung-rak had to say on today's session.
The Asia-Pacific remains one of the world's most dynamic regions, but cooperation has recently been tested by geopolitical and supply chain challenges. As the chair of this year's APEC leaders meeting, South Korea will work to reaffirm the forum's relevance and rebuild trust and collaboration across the region.
Now, after chairing this session, President Lee will have lunch with the APEC Business Advisory Council and host a welcome dinner in the evening.
Right, it's shaping up to be very busy today. So, Eugene, the president has been holding several bilateral meetings over the past few days, right? What can we expect on that front today?
You're right. So while the presidential office has yet to release today's lineup, President Lee is expected to continue his summit diplomacy here in Gyeongju. So far, he's met with 7 world leaders, including his first talks with Japan's newly elected Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi last evening. Take a listen.
격변하는 국제 정세 그리고 통상 환경 속에서 한국과 일본은 이웃 국가이자 공통점이 참으로 많은 나라입니다. 그래서 한일 양국이 그 어느 때보다 미래지향적인 협력을 강화해 줄 때라고 생각합니다.
South Korea and Japan are important neighbors. As we mark the 60th anniversary of normalizing our diplomatic ties, I believe building a stable, future-oriented partnership will serve both our nations well.
Now, Lee and Takaichi both expressed hope to meet again soon, continuing the momentum of the two countries' frequent leader-level diplomacy. I'll keep you updated as we learn more about the president's schedule later today. Back to you, Linji.
All right, Eugene, thank you for the wrap-up. Do keep us updated. Meanwhile, APEC attention shifted to South Korea's southern port city of Busan yesterday, where U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping met to get down to trade business and managed to reach a consensus on trade issues. Our Kim Bo-kyung reports.
The two leaders of the world's largest economies met each other for the first time in over 6 years. At Daremaru facility located within the Republic of Korea Air Force Base at Gimhae International Airport, the mega event of Trump-Xi meeting was held on Thursday, with the summit going on for around 100 minutes. During his opening remarks, President Trump praised Xi as a great leader and said the two countries will continue to have fantastic ties. Xi, in response, said that the two leading economies in the world having friction is normal, as each nation has different national conditions.
And we will be having some discussions. I think we've already agreed to a lot of things, and we'll agree to some more right now.
I always believe that China's development goes hand in hand with your vision to make America great again. Our two countries are fully able to help each other succeed and prosper together.
According to a short media briefing during his way back home aboard the Air Force One, Trump said the rare earth issue is settled. China reportedly decided to defer its export controls on rare earths for a year to avoid the tariffs that Trump has threatened to impose on Chinese goods. In response to Beijing agreeing to help the U.S. address the fentanyl problem, Washington agreed to reduce fentanyl-related tariffs Trump imposed from the current 20% to 10%. Trump also announced that China would immediately resume purchases of U.S. soybeans. While saying the meeting was a 12 on the scale from 0 to 10 and 10 being the best, Trump said he is to visit China in April next year, after which President Xi plans to visit either Palm Beach, Florida or Washington, D.C. Regarding any meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, Trump said he was too busy to have a chance to talk to him, as the purpose of the visit was talks with Xi, and that he intends to come back to see Kim again. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And in the meantime, here in Gyeongju, global tech giants including Google, Microsoft, and TikTok stress the need for global cooperation against the digital world. Our economic correspondent Moon Ji-young tells us more.
No significant progress can be made without robust cooperation. This message resonated throughout all sessions of the APEC CEO Summit Korea on Thursday, as global tech and business leaders convened to discuss critical issues facing the digital world. Microsoft emphasized that a critical aspect of artificial intelligence adoption is ensuring its opportunities reach the broadest possible population, which should require robust infrastructure investments alongside local company collaborations.
I think one of the things that we've been very conscious of is ensuring that we don't expand the digital divide. I think the lesson is really thinking about how do you create the most fairly inclusive areas to grow technology adoption, and that way society as a whole benefits.
He further underscored the vital role of public-private partnerships in preventing AI from widening the digital divide. Another tech giant, Google, also identified AI as a tool of potential.
AI is global. Our regulatory frameworks must be as well. By building on common international standards, we can mitigate risks without stifling innovation, creating the public trust necessary for widespread adoption. Success in the AI era will require all of us to work in partnership.
Social media giant TikTok also underscored that unlocking digital opportunities across the APEC region fundamentally requires trust-led growth.
At TikTok, we realize that trust cannot be assumed. It must be earned every single day through our actions, our transparency, and our partnerships. Building a digital ecosystem that people feel safe to participate in requires more than just policy statements. It demands consistent investment, collaboration with local experts, and product design that is grounded in user well-being.
He also cited K-culture as a powerful example, driving massive commerce with K-pop, food, drama, and beauty trends thriving on TikTok. What these global tech leaders underscored wasn't just advanced tech, but the importance of a sustainable, responsible, and future-oriented digital ecosystem. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News, Gyeongju.
And as this year's APEC CEO Summit comes to an end, discussions on artificial intelligence were at the center of the event. To take a closer look, our economics correspondent Park Jun-an spoke with Deloitte's global AI leader here in Gyeongju.
With global business leaders gathering here at the APEC CEO Summit Korea 2025 in Gyeongju to discuss the future of the world economy going forward, artificial intelligence, or AI, was one of the key phrases discussed by speakers. And in light of this year's CEO Summit had Deloitte as its exclusive knowledge partner, with its global AI leader Nitin Mittal telling Arirang News that South Korea has the potential to become a leader in AI. But to do this, the country must not only develop its own AI capabilities such as sovereign AI and frontier models, but also focus on exporting its technology, talent, and digital services to the global ecosystem.
It has a lot of natural advantages. It has a technological base already in the country. It has great companies who invest in R&D and have been the titans and the anchor of the economy. So instead of it being Korea for Korea, could it be Korea for the world? Korea for APEC? Because leadership is going to come from not only having your innate capabilities within your jurisdiction, but also actually democratizing it for the benefit of others. That democratization for the benefit of others, making it available to allies, making it available to partners, making it available to the ecosystem is what I would kind of put out there as perhaps a national aspiration that would ultimately lead in regional leadership.
Mittal also touched upon South Korea's sovereign AI model, which serves as a crucial pillar of President Lee Jae-myung's broader pledge to invest 100 trillion Korean won, about $70 billion in advancing the nation's AI ecosystem and building a system accessible to all Koreans during his term.
There has to be the means of having some kind of a national AI infrastructure so that you're not just 100% reliant on others. It also means having a focus on R&D to have your frontier models, not for the purposes of actually kind of having something that is competitive to what is out there, but for the sheer need for cultural preservation. If all models, or predominantly all of them, are let's say in the English language, how does your language, your heritage, and your culture actually get codified in these models and preserved? That is part of sovereignty too. So sovereignty by design, wherein you have a focus around your preservation and your basically kind of dissemination of culture, heritage, language, etc.
Moving forward, he also said people should use AI as a buddy, not something they should fear. As such, if AI's wide adoption is inevitable, we should be familiar with how to use AI in our daily lives.
Are we really losing a job to an AI system, or are we actually being competitively pressured by a co-worker or colleague who's using AI? Trepidation is okay because it kind of keeps us alert, but the real basically kind of focus needs to be upskilling ourselves, adapting, learning, being curious, and making AI our buddy, not something that we fear.
As the exclusive knowledge partner of this year's APEC CEO Summit, Deloitte says its goal is to both contribute to and learn from the discussions, fostering greater collaboration and shared growth across the Asia-Pacific region. Park Jun-han, Arirang News, Gyeongju.
More than 1,000 officials and business leaders from around the world have gathered here in Gyeongju. And two key themes that South Korea has laid out for this year's APEC are artificial intelligence and demographic change. For more on this, here in the studio today, I have Chung Ji-eun, CEO of a South Korean company, Codit, and a former policy analyst at the OECD. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you for having me.
So I hear you've participated in several APEC events this year, from the CEO Summit to the Digital Ministerial and Health Ministerial meetings. What key outcomes stood out to you the most, and what did South Korea achieve from these events?
Yes, we're finally here today at Gyeongju after so many events that happened before that, with a high-level discussion on the Digital Ministerial, Health Ministerial, as well as this week the head of states are here today. So yesterday Trump was there at the CEO Summit as well, delivering key messages, as well as President Lee Jae-myung giving concrete remarks on the AI initiative that's happening right now. So we see that President Lee highlighted AI as one of the most important aspects for the future sustainability, and that AI investment, as well as the infrastructure investment, as well as R&D with the AI economy, APEC economies, are going to be very important. So what South Korea achieved during this period was that they have made a concrete deal with the U.S., with the Director Michael Krasio from the White House, was here today together with the AI chief, Ha Jung-woo. They had a MOU deal on the AI prosperity. So they'll be working together to create a framework together on the AI, as well as talking, having a very concrete deals with the infrastructure investment, as well as how to make AI much more safer to use in both countries. So we see a lot more investment coming through in both countries on the AI and R&D aspect as well.
Right, it is clear that South Korea and other APEC member countries are clearly focusing on these AI issues. What do you hope to see come out of the APEC leaders' discussion on this issue of artificial intelligence?
There are both concerns as well as expectations on AI. As AI starts to develop very fast, obviously the regulatory framework is not really catching up with the development of the AI. So no one really knows what AI will actually bring to the table. So there are concerns, but at the same time, what the companies and economies are saying is that we don't yet know what's going to happen. So it's actually better to see how the innovation is going to have impact and promote each individuals, and then see how the regulatory framework can catch up afterwards. So instead of regulating the industry first, let the innovation actually take place as well. So Trump's comments yesterday on AI as well as regulatory issue was that U.S. will definitely focus more on the innovation and investing in it rather than making hurdles for the economies to actually do investment in the innovation. So I think Korea will also try to follow similar steps, but at the same time, as you know, Korea has been also looking into the regulatory framework. So we will have to see how those two actually balance each other.
Speaking of regulatory frameworks, what steps has South Korea been taking so far to establish standards for AI development and governance?
Yes. So Korea has been one of the first countries that has actually come up with the AI Basic Act, which was passed last year, and then they're going to look into the AI Basic Act enforcement decree, which is a lot more concrete in terms of what kind of regulatory guidelines and as well as the actual enforcement the companies has to follow. In that sense, the discussion is happening at the moment, and next week they're going to probably finalize the draft. So we will be able to see what sort of information will come out of it. But with the drafts that we've already seen by the companies, we do see that there are clear guidelines in terms of what the watermarking related issues, making sure that the users know whether it was created by the AI or not. There is also very specific information about what are the high impact AI, and that needs to be controlled a lot more strictly than the other type of AI. So we will see those steps going forward. But at the same time, there are concerns about ambiguity, whether some of the AI used in the industry, is it specifically high impact AI, or is it just user using AI for the benefit of the users. So there are still issues to be handled, but at the same time, because of this law and the AI strategy committee that the president has actually formed together, there is a lot more highlight in the budget that will go into the AI sector. So at the same time, we'll see a lot more discussion happening as a follow-up. And for example, the AI highway initiative, where the infrastructure investment is going to take place, it's an important initiative that Korea is putting together, and the legal framework is actually at the moment in place so that Korea can move forward quickly.
Right, we'll have to see how that goes. Yeah. And recently, South Korea went through a major disruption in government services following a data center fire. What are some measures that are needed to prevent something like this from happening again in the future?
Yes. So it's an important aspect for all of the Korean nation. It's a nationwide issue because everyday citizen is affected by the incident, basically. So this time it was fire, but it could be earthquake, it could be any other natural disasters, or any of the issues can happen. So it is more important that data is not just stored in one single place, but make sure that it's actually stored in the cloud, where it is cross-sectional. And also in some other countries, you should be able to store it so that anything happens in Korea, we can still have the services running within Korea as well. So making sure that the AI highway initiative is working properly. A lot of the investment on the infrastructure has to happen. Yesterday, AWS CEO McGarman came and he did announce that he's going to invest $5 billion to Korean, cloud-related systems. So we will see a lot of the investment coming through here in Korea, and make sure that public sector also makes use of the private, cloud, as well as collaborate with the private sector, where we can store at least data in 3 different places, so that whenever there is something like the fire happens, we can have the rerouting system or mirroring system that makes sure that we don't have interruption in the nationwide services. And I hope that this cloud-related initiative and infrastructure investment will become the new backbone of our Korea's strong infrastructure system, where we do not have any interruption, especially with AI services happening. If you have such disruption, it will actually affect a lot of the Korean people's everyday life, as well as foreign people living here as well.
Right, definitely. All right, thank you so much for coming in today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
All right, so now that ends our team coverage of APEC-related stories here in Gyeongju. For this newscast, back to you, Doyan.
All right, NG, thank you for the latest from the venue of this year's APEC event. Now, on to other news. The head of Nvidia, Jensen Huang, met with the chiefs of Samsung and Hyundai Motor in Seoul on Thursday to discuss future cooperation in artificial intelligence. The business leaders had their conversation over fried chicken and beer. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Leaders of Nvidia, Samsung, and Hyundai Motor gathered in Seoul on Thursday to discuss future cooperation in artificial intelligence. Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang met with Hyundai Motor Group Executive Chair Lee Sun-jung and Samsung Electronics Chair Lee Jae-yong at a fried chicken restaurant in southern Seoul, where the three shared beer and conversation. Huang recalled first coming to Korea in 1996 after receiving a letter from the late Samsung chairman Lee Gun-hee, who asked for help in connecting the country through high-speed internet. Huang also presented gifts to Jung and Lee with a message reading to our partnership and the future of the world. He added that Nvidia has been in talks with Samsung on high-bandwidth memory technology, with further discussions planned. Huang arrived in South Korea earlier in the day to attend the APEC CEO summit and meet both Korean and global business leaders. It marks his first visit to Korea since 2010. He also attended an event celebrating the 25th anniversary of Nvidia's GeForce graphics processors. On Thursday, Huang will take part in the APEC CEO summit in Gyeongju, where he is expected to unveil Nvidia's vision for deeper collaboration with South Korean companies. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meta Platforms announced plans to raise up to $30 billion through a bond sale. According to a Thursday filing, the six-part offering will include maturities ranging from 5 to 40 years. The move comes as tech firms race to finance the growing cost of building artificial intelligence infrastructure. Meta said its capital spending for the next year will be notably larger than in 2025, prompting close investor attention to how quickly these massive AI investments will pay off.
Good morning, I'm Chi Ji-han, and this is The World Now. In the UK, King Charles III has decided to strip his brother, Prince Andrew, of his remaining titles and royal privileges over his ties to sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Buckingham Palace officially announced on Thursday that his 65-year-old royal must vacate his official residence near Windsor Castle and no longer be addressed as His Royal Highness. The move follows weeks of pressure after new revelations about Andrew's friendship with Epstein and fresh abuse claims from Virginia Roberts Giuffre, whose posthumous memoir was released last week. The palace said the actions was necessary despite Andrew's continued denial of the allegations and expressed sympathy for all victims and survivors of abuse. He will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and is expected to move to King Sandringham Estate and receive only private family support. The move marks the first time in more than a century that a British prince has been formally stripped of his life, a sanction last seen in 1919. In Washington on Thursday, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance warned that the ongoing government shutdown could trigger a holiday travel disaster if it continues into Thanksgiving season. After a White House meeting in airline executives, unions, and aviation officials, Vance said a shutdown stretching into late November could mean thousands of absences, longer security lines, and severe flight delays. He said it could be a disaster by then. People will have missed 3 paychecks. How many are not going to show up for work? The shutdown has already forced 13,000 air traffic controllers and 50,000 TSA officers to work without pay. While airlines report a surge in delays linked to staffing shortages, Vance urged Democrats and Republicans to approve a stopgap bill to reopen the government, warning that the aviation system is reaching a breaking point. Looking ahead, airline leaders say continued inaction risks the worst Thanksgiving travel chaos in years. In Los Angeles on Thursday, Variety's Power of Woman event presented by Lifetime honored women using their influence to create change amid a turbulent political climate. Honorees included Jamie Lee Curtis, Kate Hudson, and Sydney Sweeney, each recognized for championing causes from children's health to domestic violence prevention. Gymnast and activist Ali Rezman received the Variety Courage Award for her advocacy for survivors of abuse. Organizers say the event aims to inspire more women in entertaining to lead with purpose and solidarity.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.